let's throw it open. Anyone want to talk or share about anything particularly?
I have a question concerning doing a court case, which would not be for me, but would be for my sister in terms of dealing with a generational issue. She's had some dealings with the law, been to court, got that all resolved. But my question is that something that potentially could have impact on her son, her grandson, and future generations? And if so, is there anything that I can do, because she's not a believer, to basically step in and try to mitigate that?
Okay. I mean, I think it's where there's a legal right. Obviously, that does potentially move forward. It's what the enemy would see as a legal right. If someone's done something from a legal perspective and it's dealt with legally in the justice system, then it's like, if God has already forgiven anyone's trespasses and doesn't hold it against them, then would that open a legal right? Because if it's dealt with, if it's unresolved in the court system, and that potentially could be then used because it's unresolved. If you want to do something in that, I would say make sure you have a mandate to do it. Ask for one specifically, and use the authority of that mandate to do what you can do. It's so much easier when people are in cooperation with anything to do with court cases. Yeah, we have done court cases on behalf of others, but they've been within our spheres of influence, and therefore there was an authority we had. But okay. God can give you authority in any situation.
Okay, because from the legal standpoint, she's been to court, it's resolved, it's in the process of making restitution. I just didn't know if that was something that potentially could have some blowback, since this is something that is she's never denied, she's taken responsibility for, is working through it.
Yeah.
Just a question, is that something on her side of the family that could have some impact down the line?
Well, if she's taken responsibility for it and owned it and has, then probably not. If it's the things that are hidden in secret because of shame that are the things that the enemy use, things hidden in darkness because of shame. And that's where the enemy loves darkness. And for instance, I mean, a friend of mine had some issues in his business, that he wasn't being paid on time, and his invoices weren't being paid for work he'd already delivered. And he did a court case, and he found that there was some unrighteous behavior business-wise within his generational line. He identified with it, forgave them, accepted the accusation, got a verdict, and then people were asking him how to pay. So, but I would assume that what was done in his family line was done and never resolved, and was still hidden and still secret. And I think that's the issue. When something's in the light, the enemy has no power over it. When something's in darkness, then the enemy uses the fear associated with exposure and all the other things that may come with it to effectively, legally do things to block generations in the. So yeah.
Okay, I was just curious. I really loved the conference this past week. I mean, made it a few mornings up at 4:00 in the morning and went through the whole marathon. It was really, really good. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, it was quite intense, that's for sure. And it was great. For me, what I was looking for in terms of 4 people from 4 different streams, being able to interact over some pretty controversial subjects,
yeah,
I think worked out really well.
Yeah.
And, so I was encouraged by it.
Now, Lindy is the only one who I'd never heard speak before.
Yeah.
I was familiar with Nancy, familiar with Justin, of course, familiar with her. So in that respect, a lot of what she had to say was quasi new, in fact, in the sense that I've never heard her speak before. And some of the stuff was a little out there, but Joe and I were saying, years ago, we would have been running out the door and saying, no, no, no. And it's like, okay, let me think about this, let me chew on this and let me get with the Lord, but nothing to the point that it was so, oh, this is so way out there. There's no way. Some of it, I don't have a revelation of that, but I think there's a real possibility that there's something to this. It's just not anything that I've really discussed with the Lord.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in the whole energy healing field, which I mean, I haven't really talked about a lot. I mean, I we do some of it, and I think there's more to frequency vibration, to be able to effectively bring healing and wholeness. And some of the people are engaging in supplements and things which seem to be self helping the body repair itself, and there's a lot. And I think we've just got to go with what you resonate with and put everything else on the back
Yeah,
burner. And if God wants to actually bring something forward, and if we sort of do disagree or think, I'm not sure, go back to God and ask him.
yeah,
That's the key. But we have to go back
yeah,
with an open mind
yeah,
and not go back already thinking, no, I don't believe this.
yeah,
So it's like, I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. Sometimes it's like, I don't know, but hey, I know a man who does. And I think that's the
yeah,
key. Go back
yeah.
and find out.
Yeah, it was
Um,
funny. We were talking to some friends yesterday that we knew from our old church, and Linda and I were talking, and somehow she was talking about going up to hear Jonathan Kahn speak, and I just didn't just said, oh,
mm,
hey, that's nice, and she was saying that she's really looking forward to the rapture, and I said, well, I used to believe that, but I just don't anymore.
mm,
And she just sort of like, was like, really? And I said, I'm just, I'm just not there. But she made the point. She said, well, hey, this really isn't anything to argue about. And I said, absolutely. I said, it's a non-issue. I said, I've changed my opinion. I said, but it's not a big deal. And so, I mean, we're just both laughing about, like, why make a big deal out about this? And she was saying, well, this is what gives me comfort. And I said, hey, that's cool. I said, I'm just looking at it differently now. But I said, but it's not really a big deal. So it was really nice that the two of us were sitting there laughing about that. Now we're on really opposite sides of the fence. And it's like, who cares? It's not a big deal.
it's only if you put up a fence that's the issue. If
Yeah,
you create an offensive and a defensive position, you have a
yeah,
fence between you. It doesn't have to be so. And I think that's
yeah,
what we were really looking for within the context of the conference. For different people, different ways of presenting, but with different views on many different issues, but able
hmm,
to come together and not actually have to agree on everything
yeah,
and have that relational perspective to, hey, we're all on a journey. Who knows where we will be next week, next month, next year?
yeah,
And therefore, I'm not ruling out
yeah,
things. I wouldn't testify to something I've not experienced,
yeah,
but I'm not ruling it out. I take that
yeah,
back to God. I had some
yeah,
personal conversations with Nancy, which were very interesting, and I took some of the things, but I took some of the things back to God because I
yeah,
don't have a personal testimony of some of the things we talked about.
yeah,
So I went back to God with it, and I said, okay, if this is something that you want me to be involved in, then give me some revelation and insight to enable me to be involved. If it's
yeah,
something which is okay for somebody else, but you don't want me to be involved in it, that's okay.
yeah,
I'd still appreciate some revelation that I can
yeah,
then say, okay, I'm not gonna, and I wouldn't go against what someone else's revelation was
yeah,
in that way. I want to state the revelation that I have, not I'm going to say that other people's revelation is wrong. And
yeah,
that's the difference. I can state what I've experienced, what God has said to me. I don't have to do it in such a way that it makes other people's position wrong in an
right,
overt way. Whatever conclusion people draw, that's up to
yeah,
them.
yeah,
But I think, we can state the process. And for me, I think I see these three streams flowing together that are coming from very different directions, but I believe are heading towards a more unified approach of how the Bible deals with prophecy and stuff, but in the eschatological stream, but also the mystical stream and a universal reconciliation type stream.
Yeah.
And not there are only a few people I've come across who really hold all three beliefs together in a unified way. For me, because I'm in somewhat wired to see how things are operating in the world, and particularly in the spiritual realm, to see what's happening, I can see this taking place. So I can see people who are mystics having face to face engagements with God, totally being challenged by their view of the future in view of hell, all of those, you know,
Yeah.
eternal conscious, because the very nature of the experiences we have with God in that intimacy is love. It's based in love. And when you encounter that love, it begins to challenge beliefs that don't line up with love.
Yeah. Hmm.
And it isn't just a subjective thing. Yes, there's a subjective experience, but the whole Bible is all written by people's subjective experiences. So that's not a bad thing. But it isn't just subjective. It actually begins to line up with the whole sort of tenor of things that God is doing and saying. So I can see, from that perspective, once you see the universal perspective of, yeah, I believe God gives everyone an opportunity to come into a relationship with him. Death doesn't end that choice. It's a continued, his love never fails. He's never going to give up on people. He desires, and that's what it says, he desires that all would come to a knowledge of the truth. That isn't a wish, it's a desire, and his desire is his will. So
Yeah.
he wills that all would come to a knowledge of the truth.
Truth.
So for me, that makes total sense. And when you get that perspective, then you have to look at, well, how does the Bible talk about these things? And if you can't frame how it talks about these things in a objective perspective, then it doesn't fit. And so many people are trying to pigeonhole what their experiences are into a belief system that doesn't fit it. And I see that all the time. IHOP, you have Misty Edwards prophesying in song amazing things from the throne room, but once she's released it, they don't know what to do with it because it doesn't fit in with their eschatological view of the future. So they have to either put their own spin interpretation on it or pigeonhole it into their eschatological view.
Yeah.
And that happens all the time. And so when you then begin to look at, well, Jesus said this, he said this, he said this, how can these things reconcile? Is because your whole framework of belief doesn't allow them to reconcile because you're believing everything's going to be put off in the future or in some other eschatological view. And I do believe that these three things, the mystic realm, coming to a view of Christian universal salvation, and the view.
An error has occurred. I'm unable to answer your question.
Oh,
Oh.
my watch speaking to me, that is.
Ooh.
And also, how the Bible is actually framed, that this all makes sense in context. I think those streams are flowing together. And I know some people who've got two of those perspectives, but they haven't got the mystical perspective. And I know some who've got two, and they've got the mystical and one of the other perspectives, but not necessarily all three. And it was very interesting just to talk to some of the guys, the speakers, to see not all of their perspectives are necessarily transformed. We're all on a journey.
Yeah.
No one has got it all completely neat and tidy and all there. Because I've got questions. There are some things I was like, I don't really know. I'm not, but that doesn't faze me, because if God wants me to know, I have a conversation with him that's open enough for him to tell me whatever he wants. So I believe he is working to draw all sorts of people. And I believe also that those who are on the energy healing stream will also start to get drawn into, because they're much more on the mystical thing already, but they probably, some of them don't even know a personal relationship with God.
Right.
And that's going to lead them into a personal encounter with God, which will open up that whole area for them to come into a revelation of what the source is behind a lot of things that are moving. And it
Yeah.
isn't just, we're not just talking about Christian theological streams. We're talking about people who are being drawn towards the reality of who God is and what God wants for them to come to a knowledge of the truth. They're open to the truth, but I think the church has closed down the light. Therefore, they've sought the light elsewhere, and their spirituality didn't fit within the framework of institutional Christianity. And I think
Yeah.
that is a problem,
Yeah.
which God is rectifying by, I think, putting us out there a bit further in reality to reach them.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we are getting some of the mystical revelation and a different way of spirituality, is because we will become more attractive to those who are not attracted by religion. And it's the
Right.
religion that's the problem. It's the religion that criticizes people, and one major conference the week before we had our conference drew a line and basically said, if you're on that side of the line, you're not with us, you're against us.
Now, was this over in the UK or here in the States? The
Maybe
other
in this,
conference.
I'm not saying which one it was, but
Oh,
that
no, no,
was
no.
a
I didn't know. I thought you meant it was like right in your neighborhood.
no. This
Oh,
was,
okay. Oh,
in a very well known stream,
oh,
and
okay.
that's what they did. They
Okay.
actually drew a line and said, over a specific issue, if you're not in agreement with us, you're on the other side of the line, which indicates no relationship. That's the problem. They built the fence, they drew the line, and then they're saying anyone who's on the other side of this line who don't agree with us, that is a denomination already. That's
Yeah.
already forming a denominational structure, which relationship is based on agreement rather than we're all one in Christ and
Yeah.
we're all actually one body.
Yeah.
That's the reality. We're in him, he's in us. And he does not exclude people in the whole of the Christian community or the world per
Yeah.
se from relationship with him based on what we believe.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's the key. And that's why I wanted to hopefully create an environment where we could model something different, and we didn't have to have hard, fast conclusions, but we could share heart so that people could embrace what they needed to hear and go back to God with it.
Yeah.
And for
Yeah.
that, I think it was successful.
Yeah.
And I would like to do it again. We had a lot of offers to take it on the road and take it out to other places. So I'm waiting.
Ah,
That's all going to depend on Nancy's diary for that one.
yeah. Well,
Um,
I thought her perspective that every tribe, tongue, and nation individually has something unique in it in terms of a principle of the kingdom of God that has been placed in them. Now, sometimes it's twisted. Right now they're not they're sort of operating it, but it's twisted.
mm,
Was that once that got undone, the fact that it showed that every person, every tribe, every tongue, every nation had to be in the body because no one group would ever have the whole shooting match. We were all going to need each other because specific revelations were going to come out of specific people groups. And if they're not in it, the body is going to be lacking in that respect. And I never heard anybody phrase it that way before. And I thought, that's really an
yeah,
interesting perspective. My only
yeah,
other question is, yeah,
yeah. Cool. Carry on.
it's just that on your schedule for when you're here in the States, you don't list Dallas dates. Are you not going to be in Dallas?
I am in Dallas. Yeah,
Oh, because
I'm.
you only have the on the site
Yeah,
that I
but
saw, only the
there's
Georgia.
I'm going with four different groups. So I've got two in Georgia, one in
Uh-huh.
Georgia and one in Tennessee, which is with one group who are organizing that.
Yeah.
Dallas is organized by someone else. In Missouri, in Cedar Creek Resort is organized by someone else, and Toronto is organized by somebody else. So that's why
Okay.
there's only two of those. I will, as soon as I've got the details on the others, I will
Okay.
publicize,
Okay. Okay.
and
Just wanted to
I
check
will
on it.
get onto it. But yeah,
And
I
technically,
am in Dallas on the 30th and 31st, I think.
okay. All right. I'll let my friend know. Because he may either see you there or, and technically you're in Georgia twice because they say it's Chattanooga. You're going to be in Ringgold, Georgia, is really
Okay.
where it is.
All right.
Yeah. So, okay, now I'm going to be quiet and I'll let somebody
Yeah,
else talk.
yeah. You know my geography of the states is not quite that good. So
Oh, no.
yeah,
Well, if you say Ringgold, most people won't know. If you say Chattanooga, people will understand Chattanooga and then you go, okay, just south of Chattanooga. So it is technically over the state line because Ringgold is really like a one horse, what we would call a one horse town. It's no big deal.
I'm good. I know I'm flying into Nashville, I think, so from Dallas. So I get to see lots of airports. So it's all fun. Okay. Anyone else want to talk about anything?
Dorothy, you want to go? You on mute.
Yes. I can't wait to meet you in Toronto.
Okay. Yeah, I'm there. That's my last stop until I
Oh,
come back. So yes.
very, very anxiously waiting to meet you.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Yeah,
So.
yes. And I have now left my church, which, oops, sorry, I was with my church for about 23 years, and I have now left, and it's been awesome. It has been amazing.
Yeah. Well, Mary went through that last year, I think.
Oh, God. I'm thinking, it felt like I was carrying something, and all of a sudden, no load. And the
Yeah.
freedom. What I'm going through right now is the personal relationship with the Father, because my dad died when I was very young. So that is what I'm having baby steps with. The intimate relationship with the Father, because I don't have any father figure per se, but in his own way, he's teaching me like father will carry a baby. And it's nice. I mean, baby steps, but I'm really enjoying it. I wanted to thank you so much. Thank you. It's not easy.
No, it's not easy. Life after church is quite difficult for some, but actually, in reality, I think it is something God is doing. That's not to knock the institutional church. It's just for some people on their journey, it can't. It's not enough anymore, and actually becomes a restriction to what God is doing in that way. And I think that's the problem. You know, it's a point where that covering and that system, that system is a struggle. You know, once you get to a point, and you know, the covering system is what produces the fear of, oh, you're not going to be covered now, and therefore you're going to be open to attack. And it's that God is our covering. You know, we have the armor of God, we have the armor of light, we have the armor of righteousness. We're in Him. We do not have to fear attack in that way. And I think, you know, Nancy Cohen talks about, you know, the church age and the kingdom age, and I think, you know, I think there's a truth in that the church age is not ended for those in it, but when you get to a point where new revelation comes, sometimes you can't outwork that revelation while staying in it. Some people can, but a lot of people get to, I know Mary stuck in there for years, as well. And it's like, and then all of a sudden, God says, yeah, and it's God saying, you don't leave with a bad attitude or a negativity. It's just
No.
God is saying you have to come out from there to then come into a different realm or time frame experience. And whatever you call that, it's something that God is doing. Now, I would love for the institutional church people to come out of the wilderness and come into things. And I would love the systems to come and leave their system in the wilderness and embrace that as well. It's not that I don't want to see things restored. I do. I want to see everything restored. One of the things, Nancy talks about a lot, but doesn't actually give anyone the answer is, the only thing that can't be restored is the son of perdition. And it's like what she'll say is, go and ask God for yourself what it is. And I'll give you a clue. It's not a person. So it's not talking about a person, but think of the son, which is the offspring of a system or a choice, and you get a clue about what can't be restored. You cannot restore something that God never intended. And that's the key. Every being that he created, he intended. What didn't he intend? And then you can see everything has come out of a choice to follow a path that he never intended. So for me, that's really what that is talking about. And I don't think things which have been created by do it yourself can be restored. You have to come back to God's original intention.
That is so true. Yes.
So enjoy the freedom and the intimacy of being able to engage God. And actually not having an earthly father sometimes can be better than having a bad one, because you then have to deal with the wounds of having a bad model rather than the fact of just not having any model, because God can easily step into that role. Whereas, most of us have had, for me, I had a very bad role model when it came to everything to do with fatherhood and relationship and everything else. Therefore, it was quite difficult even to think about God being father. So enjoy being fathered. That's the wonderful thing about face-to-face intimacy. We can be father, which is awesome, really.
It is awesome. It is awesome. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Mary, you got your hand up there again.
Well, going back to the whole thing about being in church, we did hang in there for a while, and we did our best to really try to carefully integrate things. And our pastor was always very open. I mean, he was always listening. He never shut us down or anything. So that was not the problem there. But Joe and I were talking after the conference, and I said, okay, now, I said, if we were still at Bethel, I said, with the exception of Scott, the pastor, who I think he could have listened to it all, and he may not have agreed with it all, but he would have been like, okay, let me, I'll go back to the Father on that. That's really interesting. I said, who else there do you think could have sat down and listened to that and not got up screaming and running out the door? And he said, nobody. and I really think that's the case. There's a lot of that there, that if I was still in that church, other than talking to Scott very privately on the side, would not have really been able to talk about a lot of that, even just as here's a hypothetical situation. I mean, when I was talking to my friend about that dinner I told you about, she was interested about having the courts. That's what the whole dinner was about. That's all we talked about all night. And she talked about that, hey, when Ian Clayton came that time to Atlanta, she threw the baby out with the bathwater and didn't want to hear any of it. And of course, now it's starting to open up a little bit. And so I told her, I said, hey, there's a couple things now that I said that I'm contemplating. And she was sort of a little like, but not right now. I said, hey, I'm just sort of weighing what if. This is, I'm looking at it just a little bit differently. And I said, probably wouldn't fit. Because she said to me, she goes, we may start a home church. She said, would you want to come? And I said, no. And I told you I should have gone back and clarified it with Deborah, because you live an hour away from me, for one thing. There's a distance factor. And the next time I see her, I'm going to tell her, because I was so emphatic. It just sort of, caught her. And I said to Joe, I said, I should have gone back and said, hey, a lot of it has to do with distance. There's just no way I'm driving an hour anymore. That's not going to happen. But no, I'm not. If anything is going to happen, I want it here. I don't necessarily want to have to every week drive an hour. I want to see something happen in my area, which is what I'm calling forth to birth here now. However God brings that about, I don't know. But I don't want to have to go the long distance travel, because we've done that enough times. And my county needs something going on in it. This area needs it. So I'm not looking necessarily to branch out again, going somewhere else. But, where we were before, we couldn't have talked a lot about what we heard over the weekend. Whether I agreed with it or not, I'd be like, just don't even touch that, because, people would have been like, ugh. I guess I'm getting used to that now.
Yeah. And I think it's like, if you cannot genuinely be you and relate to people as you, and not have to walk on eggshells, then you can't be you in that environment. So in a sense, you're not doing anyone any good, and not doing yourself any good, having to effectively continually be careful about what you say, and you can't genuinely be excited about the things you're experiencing or share those testimonies, because they wouldn't receive them, and it would potentially create the problems and controversy and the stuff that you get. So I think it is that if you can't be you, then it is time to consider, what should I be here? And I think that's the key. And only God can give you the yay or nay on that ultimately. And it's like, okay, do you want me to stay here or not? But I do think it creates a huge tension when you can't live in a genuine, authentic way to who you really are. And that's not, it's not comfortable, is it? To try and have to tone down or tailor what you say or not say on the basis of they wouldn't receive it, and then it's going to cause all this problems.
Oh yeah. Because I realize now, and I tried, to say to people, I really do. Because I even said to Deborah, I said, I really don't fit in a conventional church anymore. I said, I really don't. I said, my theology has really, surprising to me, has really radically changed. I said, I really don't fit in a lot of places. I said, I don't talk a whole lot about it. I said, I'm certainly not going to go around trying to stir up controversy. I said, but it just doesn't fit, and so it just doesn't work anymore. And
and if you did start sharing in that way, it would cause problems for those who are in the leadership of that church that I wouldn't want to cause them, to be honest, because it's not fair. If they're not in a place, then it isn't fair to, because it's undermining. That's, some people try and change things from within, and they do it without having the authority to do it. Therefore, they're undermining the authority that exists there. And I just don't think that's a good thing to do. And I think it's better not to be in it. And the bottom line is, if relationships are genuine, they don't end if you go to a different meeting or don't go to a meeting. They shouldn't. But generally, you find that they're not real relationships at all. They were the relationships you had because you happened to be in the same church. They weren't life relationships. It's irrespective of the church you're in. And I think that really is the key. Relationships shouldn't be at stake, but often it is, because they weren't genuinely true friendships. They were church friendships, and you're not in that church anymore. Therefore, the friendships are no longer going to be there. But some relationships go beyond, and I think those are the genuine things that you find that you can talk honestly and openly, even if you don't necessarily agree or you're not in the same place on your journey. They know you, and they know that your heart, and that's where the things can be at work. It's this heart to heart.
Yeah.
No.
Now I'll bounce this off of you. The weekend before your conference, we were over in Canton, over at the Embry's. You remember AC and Ann, because you stayed at their house, and they had invited someone in, and I'm not going to say who it is. Someone very well known. We've gone there before to hear them, love them. And the person was talking about, what's his name? Steve, is this guy Stevie McKee?
Yes, Stevie McKee. Yeah.
Stevie McKee. Evidently, what was Liz had told the story that Stevie McKee had related about Patrick in Ireland, that Patrick somehow came upon some people that were evil, and so he caused an earthquake, and 400 people died, and they were using that as a thing to say that's the kind of power, that is resident in a believer. But the emphasis was, well, we as a church need to get to the point that when we see something like that happening, we can cause an earthquake and the earth will open up and swallow evil people. And I'm sitting there thinking like, well, maybe Patrick did that. I don't know. I've never gone back and read history, but I'm thinking, well, why didn't Jesus do that?
Yeah.
Why didn't the apostles do it? I mean, they had tons of enemies, and I'm thinking, oh man, that doesn't sound like love. And he goes, the reason Patrick did it was because he had such a deep relationship with the Lord that he knew that these people, that their scrolls, that they were not going to repent, that they were going to stay evil all their life. And I'm thinking, I don't know that I'm not really.
I think we've got to be careful on all of that. I think, in reality, again, when you actually realize that whether in this life, yes, there are those who reject the good news and do their own thing. But once you realize that death is not the end of their choice, then that changes the perspective of that. And, okay, you can look back in the Old Testament, you could see, okay, there's a cleansing of Sodom and Gomorrah with the fire and the brimstone. But that's an illustration of a bigger principle of fire purifying, not necessarily taken as the story of that happening in a judgment sense against those people, but look at it from the principle. And a lot of the things are there to show us principles which are, applied to our lives. So the fire and the, brimstone, which is the word for,
was it the incense of God? Wasn't the incense of heaven or something?
Yeah, the theosis. And actually it now, like the 4 rivers in the Genesis coming out of the garden, which now equates to the 4 chambers of our heart and the rivers of living water flowing from our innermost being, there is a spiritual application that is for those things in our lives, and we've got to be careful we don't try and apply it in the literal practical sense, because all the promises of God are now yes and amen in Christ. They're not the same dimension of things to be outworked in that way. And Jesus didn't do that. And on the cross, he's looking at people who were going to persecute the church for the next 40 years. And he said, Father, forgive them. They didn't have to say sorry. They didn't have to ask for forgiveness. He just responded to them out of love. And that is the key that we need to look at. Did some of them end up in the rubbish dump of Gehenna? Yeah. Thousands and thousands of them ended up there. Was that his intention that they should go there? And did he put them there? No. But their choices did. And he allowed them the consequence of their choices, having warned them of where they would end up if they continued to function in the old covenant, that they would end up with the curses of the old covenant, because the covenant had curses and blessings associated with it. The new covenant has blessings associated with it.
Yeah.
That's the difference. So no, we should have the power, but no, we don't call fire down out of heaven and burn up a village or cause an earthquake, because that's not what Jesus did. And he told his disciples not to do that either.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean we have to stand by and let things happen? That's where we need to have a mandate. You know, it's like the mandate will determine what we can and what we can't limit. But what we'll do is do it in love, not out of
Yeah.
judgment and retribution and punishment. So, what's the best way to deal with people? Preach the gospel and be the light to them in such a way that it does turn them to walk away from darkness and follow the light. What do you do by killing people? You just create martyrs that then build up a bigger cause for that to happen again and again. And it's the same thing applies with the terrorism and all that. Well, we'll drop a bigger bomb and a bigger bomb and a bigger bomb until we wipe them all out. Well, you won't wipe them out because all you'll do is propagate hatred and revenge. You know, and that's the problem when it comes to how do we deal with things which from an earthly perspective are terrible. God loves the perpetrator as much as the victim. That is so, people so struggle with that view of his judgment. His judgment is based on the cross, and guess what? Mercy triumphed over all of what happened.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Therefore, we don't need to see the judgment outworked in punishment or death or destruction. There are other ways. And should we carry that authority, then we have the authority to stop them hurting us and people. You know, we don't have to allow them to carry on doing what we're doing. We get a strategy out of heaven to begin to change and protect people from those things, which is why, you know, people are looking to help people in the whole trafficking thing. Let's start doing court cases in heaven to begin to change some of that. But the best way of changing it is to turn darkness into light. So what you're doing is you're bringing the darkness, the light out of someone, which dispels the darkness that they've been living in, so that they can truly know, just as Paul. I mean, how many people would have killed Paul with that attitude when he was Saul? So you wouldn't have had all these things because they would have killed him because, well, we're going to bring the judge, we're going to get God to take him out. And what would have happened?
Would have missed, you know, one of the greatest,
absolutely,
you know, evangelists and writers in the church.
Yep. And therefore, that's the way we need to look at it. So the best way is to turn our enemies into our footstool, into the footstool, which is the place of rest where people will then turn to worship God. And we're much more likely to do that by demonstrating love and not demonstrating anger and vengeance in those things. And that can take it to such an extreme that pro-life people will bomb clinics and kill people. I mean, because it's a twisted mindset that has a wrong view of God as this angry God who needs appeasement and will kill people and remove people and do that. You know, it's like, let's say I'm in a situation where someone pulls a gun on me, which is pretty unlikely in this country, but let's say I'm in the States on a tour or something, and someone pulls a gun on me. I'm not going to have a gun in my back pocket to pull on them, obviously. Even if I did, I wouldn't be using it, because we have to know the authority which can stop them doing what they're planning to do, but without killing them or damaging them. But for us then to be able to demonstrate we have a greater dimension of authority than they do, that authority comes from a relationship with God. And if you really want to make a difference in your community, blah, 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 then here's the person you need to get in touch with. You know, we need to actually start functioning in a completely different way and perspective of how we look at those issues, and stop coming from a man-made do-it-yourself version of justice.
Yeah, I think if I can chip in there, Mark, for the way I see it and the way I've experienced it, it's basically a sowing and reaping. So if I continue to sow the same thing that they're sowing, we're going to continue to reap the same thing. So we have to come and sow the opposite into the situation. And that's, I think Jesus modeled that very well in Paul as well. So, and that's something that God has been taking me through as well, just learning to say, well, don't react in the natural. If you have to carry his love in your heart and and then act out of that, no matter what.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely so. And there are consequences. I mean, this is where people, well, it's not fair. People can do what they like and get away with it. No, no one gets away with anything. People have to live with the consequences of their choices, their decisions. And I wouldn't want to be living with the consequences of carrying what some people have done. Now some people will say, oh, well, they don't have any guilt. And okay, there may be some psychopaths and sociopaths who don't have any empathy with others, but they're few and far between. That they are the very, very extreme end of the situation. And for those people, we have consequences. We lock them up. So we stop them continuing to affect society. And I believe that God allows us to have the consequences. People can choose to not accept him. And the consequence of that choice is they don't enjoy all the benefits of living in relation to it while here. And they go to a place where I wouldn't want anyone to go, to be purified and refined, so that whatever hindered and stopped them effectively engaging with God is dealt with so that they can. That to me is what God really wants. Their consequences, he does remove his hand and say, okay, if this is what you want to do, you can do it. I don't want you to do it. There are warnings against doing it, but if you do, what isn't though? God is bringing those consequences on anybody. That's where people get it wrong. Oh, God is putting his judgment on those people. No, he removes his hand and says, okay, you walking this way, then you're open to the consequences, and it's the enemy who does the consequences. He's the one who wants to rob, kill, and destroy. And even when God desperately doesn't want people to be robbed, killed, and to be destroyed. He wants them to have abundant life. And that abundant life is what we've got to demonstrate in such a way that people won't want to be walking in the consequences of their doing their own thing. But by telling them they're wrong and placarding as the believers that you can't do this and this is wrong, and you are the spawn of the devil, and God's going to bring AIDS on you and all this stuff. I mean, all of that whole thing, was a total contradiction to the love of God and the nature and character of God. Was AIDS a consequence of the lifestyle they chose? Absolutely. Did God produce that? No. And I think this is where we really got to be careful in how we present or misrepresent God in what we say and what we do and how we look at those situations. So now no one is saying, oh, God inspired the production of chemicals or things that can now stop AIDS killing people, did they? Everyone goes quiet then. So God gets the blame when it's bad, but when it's good, no, God wouldn't do that because he wants them to die. Well, in reality, no, he doesn't. And I think there's that whole sense where the power of engaging the love of God will begin to change our whole view of who he is, how he operates, and how we operate. And if my children choose to do something that I don't want them to do, I'll never stop loving them, no matter what they do or what they've done, because they're my children. They may be choosing to do something that I wouldn't choose for them, but they have the right to choose, and I'm going to love them. Will I bail them out of every situation? Most of the time, yeah, but not always. I make sure when there's a situation that they need bailing out of because of the choices they've made, to ask God, do I have permission to financially help them here or to help them in this situation? If he says yes, I will. If he says no, I won't. But I'm never going to stop loving them no matter what they do. And there's nothing they could do to stop me loving them. They could do the worst things in the world. They could kill someone. They could commit atrocities, but it wouldn't stop me loving them. Would I love what they've done? Of course not. And would I be horrified by what they've done? Yeah, but it wouldn't stop me loving them. And nothing we do can stop God loving us, because we are his children, irrespective of what we do or don't do. And his love never fails and never gives up. And who can separate us from the love of God? Now, I know Christians will say, yeah, but that's only talking about those who believe in him. Actually, no, it isn't. God works all things together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Everyone is called according to his purpose. Everyone has a destiny that he wants them to fulfill. And he loves them equally and is working in their lives to help them come to a place where they fulfill their destiny. So if we didn't have that view, someone like Nancy Cohen wouldn't be going into these Muslim countries and preaching to the worst of the jihadists and demonstrating life to see them change. They are changing, and they're hidden, waiting for the right time to be the Pauls of their people. And the same are, what we've done in the past is, let's see someone saved, and now we'll take them out of their situation and we'll parade them in the church as this amazing testimony of what God can do. And then they're never able to go back and engage the communities that they come out of, because we've conditioned them to church. It's like, no, there are hundreds of thousands of people out there who have a personal relationship with God through Jesus, and yet are still operating in the Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, and other faiths, plus the New Age movement and other things, because they're there as light within those communities, and one day they will come out and demonstrate that life in fullness and be able to point their people to the light, is Jesus. And I wouldn't want to remove any of them from those positions. In China, a whole load of the government are believers, and they're waiting for the right time when they're mandated to come out into the right time, the right conditions, to actually lead the nation into the light. And I think God is doing that all over the world with all sorts of people groups and everything else. And we've got to get away from the old things, come out from among them. Because that was an old covenant perspective in the interim period of the transition between old and new. It is never intended for the new covenant that we can't have relationship with the world. We're in the world. We're not of it, but we're in it. Why? To be light and love, and to shine with love's light and to radiate that light in such a way that it draws people to the light. Yeah, Mary.
Well, there's even an example of that in the Old Testament, which is Naaman or Naaman, however you would say his name, after he gets healed, and he says to Elijah, okay, I believe in your God, but please, will God forgive me? I'm going to have to go into the temple with the king, because I'm going to have to escort him in there, and I'm going to have to do this because it's the nature of my job to say. And Elijah didn't say, well, hey, cut it off, buddy. It's either you stand up and, you take your stand or you're out. It was sort of like, okay, that's a situation you're going to be put in. Fine. Who the true God is. God is not going to strike you dead if you've got to walk in here with the boss, and go through something. So there is that precedent in the Old Testament, even that, you may have to be, like you say, undercover, so to speak, for a period of time until the right time. Absolutely. That you are then free to be open and completely open about who you are and what you believe. But in the interim time, you are planting seed, and spreading light.
Absolutely. And same with Esther. Esther was called to the kingdom for such a time as that. And she was prepared to go into a foreign king and be his concubine.
Not that she had a whole lot of choice, essentially,
but it was her destiny.
Yeah.
And that was the reason she was called into it. It's
Yeah.
like God had prepared her for that. That was the key.
Yeah.
God had prepared her for it, and he was okay with the fact that she was going to have to go and sleep with a king,
Yeah.
a foreign king, and therefore potentially produce offsprings for that king.
Yeah.
Now they would become Samaritans, who the other Jews wouldn't have anything to do with.
Yeah.
And that's the dynamic that is potentially there. God sees the bigger picture in all of this, and is not limited by our sense of what we think is right and what we
Correct.
think is wrong. It's about actually the bigger picture. Yeah, Div. Yeah.
So I don't know how much time we've got left, how long the session runs for, but yeah, I just want to come back to the restoration of all things, the conference where, yeah, I think it's phenomenal. There's something in my spirit that just is just leaping. I think, I don't know, my mind doesn't understand it, but so that it begs the question in me, it's opening up something that obviously I can't see and so on, but you can pick up there's something being opened up around that. And I know with the different streams and so on. So I don't know if you're at liberty, what your perception is of where it can go, what's opening up here.
Well, I think it's opening up our heart-to-heart connection with the oracles of the Father's heart to unveil the deepest desire for the restoration of everything God intended, to restore it back to its original condition and intention, and then go from there. So I don't think you can exclude anything from all. It's very difficult to exclude everything from all, because it means all.
Yeah.
It means all, which is all. Therefore, that's the implication of where this is going. And this is why people are drawing lines, because they cannot believe that it could be all, because of the conditioning of the religious traditions we've been brought up with, and the DIY mindset of our own sense of fair play and justice, which is they've done worse things than me, therefore they don't deserve it, and I do, which is essentially what that religious mindset's all about. It's all about dead works, and it's about how you perceive someone in relation to somebody else, where for God, he only views people in the same view. So it is going in that direction, and that means the restoration of everything. Now, that does not mean the redemption of everything. You can only redeem a soul. Now, who has souls? That is the reality. Angelic beings they are spirits. They're created a spirit being. They don't have a soul. That's not to say that your spirit doesn't have consciousness or personality. It does, but it isn't a soul. It isn't a soul, a living soul, that only is created with the breath of God in it, and that is mankind. Or maybe this dimension in which we live. I don't know. That's something that I have not yet fully encountered, but I have been to other dimensions. And for me, those other dimensional beings didn't appear to me to be spiritual beings, pure spiritual beings. They were other dimensional beings of the same creation that we are created in. They were made, when God created the heavens and the earth, he created the angelic beings and those things to observe the creation of everything else. So if there are other, and this is a hypothetical because I don't know, I know that there are other dimensional beings because I've been to 3 other dimensions and I've experienced those beings. Those beings, for me, had volition, choice, and for me, I sensed a soul. Therefore, I believe they can be redeemed and restored. If there were beings in other planets, I'm not saying there are or aren't because I've not actually been to other planets to know, then they would be made at the same time as this creation, And therefore, would they be made with a soul? If they do, because they're not pure spirit beings, are they? You know, if they're walking around in a physical body, it's like, so I believe those that have a soul can be redeemed, and that redemption is on the basis of what Jesus did, being slain before the foundation of the world on the foundation stone of creation, not just the cross. But of course, for God, the cross and before the world are the same because they're all now. So we can't see it in a time frame. But when you're looking at it, I believe spirit beings were created with a purpose and a function within God's kingdom and created as sons of God in the generic term, because they were called the sons of God. And the Ben Elohim are called the sons of God, and the Elohim, you know, they're all got names. They're spirit beings. So, but they can be restored, but not redeemed. So they can be restored to their pre-fall position within God's kingdom. So when I've got some testimonies of that, which I hopefully soon will have, because I've been engaging God around it all, and I have a mission to go on and do, then I will share that. But my question would be, why wouldn't I want everything to be restored? That's for me, the more I've engaged the love of God and know God's heart for creation and connected to creation myself, I want it to be restored. I want everything to be restored. And it doesn't matter what they've done or not done, as it doesn't matter to me what anyone's done. You know, bottom line is, if someone did something horrible to one of my children, would I want them damned forever, or would I want them restored? I'd want them restored. I'd forgive them. I release them. I would want them to be blessed so that they could come out of the brokenness which caused them to do that in the first place. I wouldn't want them to be punished in such a way that they had no hope of restoration. So it comes down to, are we perceiving and seeing and knowing the heart of the Father to dictate what we do and what we live by, which is what Jesus did. I only do what I see the Father doing. He knew the Father's heart. The more I found and engaged with the Father's heart, the greater capacity I have to love the whole of creation, irrespective of what it's done. So my desire would be see everything restored. Now, I believe that's just the beginning. That's taking it back to what it should be, so then we can go on to what it will be. And whatever that means, that is what we're pursuing. And I believe God is opening up the revelation of what that means, so that more and more people will embrace his heart and be part of the solution to bring about that restoration, rather than the problem that's trying to stop that restoration.
Yeah.
You know? So that's sort of where I would be on the whole journey of it. You know, there are things I've done, there are things I believe that I have a mandate to do that indicate to me God's desire to restore everything that he has created back to its original intention and purpose. And should those things now be covered in a veil of darkness or dragon scales or whatever you want to do it as an illustration of things which we now see as the enemy, when I kill a dragon, I'm not killing it. The symbolic chopping off of a dragon's head is removing its authority. That's all. You can't kill a spirit.
Yeah.
You know, God created it out of himself. So you can't kill it. But you can remove its authority. But I would rather see it restored and working alongside me than going and finding someone else to go and afflict. Because I might remove it from the authority of my positions, but I guarantee someone else will be open for it to come and engage their position. So I'd rather see it restored. And on the positive side, let's actually see some of those 1/3 of all the angels that fell come and increase the population of those who are working for the light, rather than being in darkness. Why not? And this is where it comes to. It makes no logical sense to me now why I would ever have thought different, but I obviously did. But it's very hard once you have the revelation to even like, why did I ever think like that? Well, I did because I was conditioned to, and other people still are conditioned to. That's why they're drawing these lines over these issues, because they're saying biblically that isn't possible. And actually, their understanding of that theologically is tied to an eschatological view, which is that the lake of fire is for the devil and his angels. Now, I could give you word studies that prove that fire and that brimstone and all that don't mean eternal conscious torment, but actually still mean restorative in that sense. Just even if that from a word study point. But I could also give you theological evidence that wasn't talking about the literal devil or literal angels, but was talking about the accuser of the early church, which was the high priest, plus all those that were working with him, including Paul. Now, I'm very grateful that Paul didn't get thrown into the lake of fire, which was literally the same thing as Gehenna. Because that is just... See, what Luke recorded in Luke 21 onwards, and what Matthew recorded in Matthew 21 to 25, 6, John recorded in Revelation. And what he was describing there was the end of the old covenant system and where the accusers would end up, and they did. Now, even though they ended up in there, that wasn't the end for them. I'm sure as soon as they ended up in there, and they're then into the realm of God's consuming love of fire, they would have probably realized their mistake and come to have to face their soul choices for rejecting Jesus. I mean, man, people reject Jesus today who they've never met. What about those who met him face to face and rejected him? They're going to have to face the consequence of that choice, which is anguish of soul, gnashing of teeth. Gnashing of teeth was a frustration of what happened when they saw something that didn't fit in with what they believed. And so I do believe there will be a lot of gnashing of teeth when people realize that the decisions of their soul didn't have to be made, and that they put themselves through this by their own choices, and they're now living under the consequences of those choices. But God never gives up, and they can come out of that by bowing the knee and accepting Jesus as Lord. Now, I know people struggle with that, but for me, it's the most logical thing that could possibly be now, because it totally fits into everything I've experienced of God, everything I can see the Bible is framed with, and my own personal experiences. And if someone wants to take umbrage with that, they're totally entitled to. They don't have to believe me. And I'm not trying to convince anyone to believe otherwise. That's God's business. The Spirit of truth is the only one who can unveil truth and the truth of who Jesus is. I understand the challenge that people are facing with all this. And I understand the challenge of religious mindsets and belief systems. And how difficult it is to get them undone. When people have face-to-face encounters with God in this mystic realm, I think the responsibility that they have increases in a sense, because they're now not ignorant of the full revelation of who God is. And so those that are saying not everything can be restored because the Bible says they can't, then I think that creates a problem. And I think Nancy Cohen quoted and said, Jesus said, "The Father has given me all things into my hands, and I've lost none of that which he's given me."
Good.
So who's he given? The whole of creation. So that's an indication that Jesus was saying, hey, everything the Father's given me, I'm not going to lose any of it. I may have to go through several stages of being able to reach it, but I'm not going to give up. Because bottom line is, the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son still belong to the owner, effectively. The son was still the son of the Father. The coin still belonged to the woman, and the sheep still belonged to the shepherd, even though they were lost. And the lost is the same word for perishing. It's just we've associated perishing with forever, but lost being temporary. It's the same word. It's temporary. It's a temporary condition until people come to their senses, like the prodigal did. Some are still coming to their senses within the consuming fire of God's love. So eventually they can say, Jesus is Lord. And accept that and come to be restored back to sonship, which God always intended them to have. Yeah. Mary?
Well, just one little quick thing to tie up on that. And in the parable of the prodigal, in that culture, when the older brother was standing outside and wouldn't come in that culture, the father would have stood at the door of the house and been there constantly trying to resolve the situation. He would not have left and gone back into the party with everybody else. He would have stood there, as long as it took to get the brother in, and so that's a perfect picture of, you're standing outside and and the brother's being obstinate and blah, and yet the father is still there. Come in. It makes perfect sense.
And Jesus also indicated with the parable of the wages that someone working a full day their whole life and someone coming to Jesus on their deathbed or after they die, there is no difference in what they receive in sonship. It's the same. They obviously said, this isn't fair. This person's only done an hour. That is the DIY mindset, which is works orientated. Everything is done by performance. So we mete out performance in that way. That is not how Jesus does it. And I think that's, again, another illustration of how this works. I believe Jesus visits everyone on their deathbed with an opportunity of responding there. And many, many do, but some don't. And then when they don't, he then continues to visit them in fire, and he's, in course, calling us to do the same things that he did and do greater things. That is some of now our responsibility to reach those of our generational lines and others that we have authority to do with that good news in a way which will reach them. So that is good news to them.
Yeah. And we had that situation happen when Joe's mom died. His mom and dad, they knew we were believers, never really wanted to hear anything about it to that effect. And he had a dream, I don't know if it was the night that we found out or whatever, that the Lord in the dream said, hey, I spoke to her, and she's in heaven. Well, what we found out afterwards when we were visiting with his father, that this old friend of his father had an old work buddy. They palled around together. The old friend got saved. And he was talking about that the old friend was always sending this literature. It sounds like he was sending tracts or whatever, to Joe's dad. And Joe's dad said, I never read them, but Helen read every one of them. So we're like going, oh man, there was seed being planted. I don't know what she was reading, but somehow there was seed being planted all along. So when you talk about Jesus going to everyone, that was the thing. And Joe just said, I just have to accept this on face value, that this is what I saw in the dream. It was Jesus. He said she's there. He goes, I'm just going to have to accept it by faith.
Absolutely. Yeah. God is such an awesome, loving God. It's just like his love will never fail. It will never give up. It's like, where can I flee from your presence? I go down into Sheol, you're there. That's the reality. He is there. He was there. He continues to be there. Now it's not Sheol as we knew it, but the fire of his love in that sense. Yeah. Okay. last one. Div, we'll finish up with this.
Okay, yes, sorry. Yeah, it's basically, I think, with the whole thing about the restoration, and just saying, when I came into this, what I was seeing and sort of the end state and what we would be as spiritual beings and experiencing that, and I actually got disillusioned around the timing of all of it, where there's the now that looks like now, but yet seeing and experiencing what's to be, and then bringing the two together. And I think that was one of the things that, so looking at the restoration, the conference that just went on, there's a lot of stuff that resonated with me, but yet we've got to be content with what we have and content for the future.
Well, I'm not. I'm content in my relationship with God. I'm not content to see the world in the state it is. I want to make a difference. So I want to. That motivates me to, in a sense, say, hey, what is my role in the restoration of all things? Yeah. And that starts with restoration of relationship with my children. If there's any, it starts in me living it out in a real way. And then it looks like that within my community, and it looks like that. I start with Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth. I have a role to play. Now that can be a role in the heavens, it can be a role on the earth. You know, in one sense, I understand what you're saying. When you start to see what it can be, you sort of look at here and it's like, what do I feel about that? I want embassies of heaven on earth, demonstrating what the reality of living in the kingdom of God is about, so the rest of the world will see. I want to be part of the mountain of the house of the Lord lifted up, so the world will come to it and stream to it. So I don't think I'm helpless in it, but I'm on a journey towards what is that going to look like and how are we going to facilitate that. For me, it's like raising up the Joshua generation, equipping it to reach the next generation to change the world. You know, I don't think it's going to be a magic wand event. You know, it's a process, and we're involved in that process, and we just need to find what we're called to do within that process. But it's going to be personal, and hopefully it may well be corporate with other people who carry the same heart and the same mind, so we can have these places established that the world can truly see what it's like living in the kingdom, because that's what Israel should have been. But they kept going after foreign stuff, you know, and then they wanted a king like everybody else. You know, we have to have that purity of heart that says, no, this is living out of heaven on the earth, and we're not going to be subject to all of these earthly things. And we're going to deal with the atmosphere, and we're going to have an open heaven, and we're going to live in that way. And we're going to be gateways of heaven into the earth individually, and we're going to open up the everlasting doors, which pours the river of life into the earth where we're living in the way that God intends, so that we can see everything restored, you know. And so I'm excited by that. And I think the more and more people who get on to it, get hold of it, the more and more energy that we create in our consciousness and our belief will begin to change and transform the way people look at Christians, and that will change everything, you know, when they see the genuine, authentic, real sons of God. Because it's the unveiling or the revealing or the manifesting of the sons of God which will answer creation's groan. And everyone's groaning in some way or form, because they're groaning because this isn't how it should be. So we answer creation's groan by being sons of light. And I think that's what God's looking for us to be, transfigured, sons of light, that the world will truly see what the sons of God are all about and want a relationship with our dad because of our wonderful relationship with our dad, which I think is pretty awesome. Anyway, I need to leave it there. I'll